Well, this is the 50th anniversary of the Beatles appearing on the Ed Sullivan Show. And how many of you were around to witness that personally? You have vivid memories of it? Anybody want to share what your parents thought of it, or? Huh?
My dad thought it was the end of the world too.
They thought it was the end of the world.
Mine wanted the TV off.
I grew my hair like that, and my mother said, "I can't see you."
I sat in my living room and screamed hysterically. Just kidding.
Well, we're honoring the Beatles today, the 50th anniversary of this band, and there's radio stations around the country that are paying homage to the Beatles. There's a lot of, I think, my son and I were on our way to a gig the other night, and it was Beatles weekend, and they were playing songs. I have to admit, I haven't listened to every one of the Beatles songs, and they were pulling some out that, you know, I hadn't listened to. Of course, I've heard all of the major ones on their greatest hits album, but there's some that I probably still haven't heard. I think it's amazing the prolific nature of the Beatles, that they were together from 1963 to 1970, a total of 7 years. And in that time, they recorded about 240 songs. And if you think about that, that was about 30 songs a year. So that was an average of about 3 albums a year for about 7 years. You know, give or take. Some albums were, of course, you have the double album, the White Album. But they were very prolific in their music writing, and it's a fact that sort of goes a little unnoticed for the time frame that they were together and the popularity that they were together. But today, even, here we are 50 years removed from the Beatles, and I Want to Hold Your Hand, and P.S. I Love You, and I Love Her, and those songs, they still resonate with people. And if I sang na na na, it's almost impossible not to sing along, right? It was in full force. Beatlemania was in full force, and every album was just chocked with hit songs. The screaming fans were endless. Remember the movie The Hard Day's Night? It was the first movie that it was. They started recording The Hard Day's Night in March of 1964, just a few short weeks after the Beatles had arrived in America, and they came back to London, and they started immediate production on this movie, and it only took them about 16 weeks to put the movie together. And it starts out with the Beatles running through this train station, avoiding this mass hysteria of fans that are following them and running after them and trying to catch them. And the Beatles are dodging them and moving into phone booths and finally getting on the train and being able to get away from this mass horde of people. And I often wondered, what were they going to do when they caught the Beatles? You know, what were they really? You know, you're running after these guys. You're like, okay, what's the point? You know, you just want to touch them or what? You know, you don't know. But they inspired so many musicians to also become musicians. They were influential not only with their music and the social changes that they inspired, but also just by the mere fact that they were a popular group. They wrote great songs, and a lot of people drew their inspiration and wanted to be just like them. And I wanted to talk about, how did the Beatles become so popular? What was it about them that made these four any different than the Fab Four, or the Fabulous Freshmen, or the Drifters? All of those groups had great songs. Jan and Dean, the Beach Boys, had great songs. And not to say that they didn't have legitimate fans. What was it about these four that just seemed to have the magic that drew us to them? I thought about this a long time, because we could certainly point to Beatlemania and credit Oh, they had a clever marketing plan. They had a great producer in the studio. Of course, they had great songs. You know, all of those things were really important. But what made us fall head over heels in love with these guys? And I came up with one suggestion and one solution. Not even a solution, but a suggestion. Is that it was their believability. If we look at these guys, these four guys, they were singing songs such as I Want to Hold Your Hand, and girls that would listen to these songs, they were saying everything to these young girls, these young fans, that these girls would want to hear from their boyfriend or from their husband. I want to hold your hand. P.S. I love you. And if we look at the line in the song, And I Love Her, a love like ours will never die as long as I have you near me. Money can't buy me love. What were they thinking? It was their believability. And the guys that looked at these guys, they were, you know, fairly handsome guys. I would say, probably girls would say, oh, they were really cute, you know. But they weren't like Rock Hudson, or they weren't movie star quality. They were guys that you could live down the street from. We all could all identify with having to wear a coat and tie. We could all, recognize that, hey, these guys didn't have perfect teeth. They weren't, they weren't particularly outstanding in their appearance, but I mean, they looked nice. And guys looked at these guys and said, you know, it's almost like we could play music too. We could get a guitar, and we could have drums, and we could put together a band, and we could be having as much fun as you guys. Yeah, you could do it. There was a believability about the Beatles, and that quality that drew us to that Beatlemania was the quality that was resonating within each person. Every person had a unique way of identifying with the Beatles. And we got lost in the hysteria of living vicariously through them. They were just four normal guys. They were like the guys you would want to date, or they were like the guys you would want to hang out with. They were one of us. They were one of us. And every person had something that I called the EPO, the emotional payoff. There was an emotional payoff. And they did it better than anybody. I mean, we could look at other groups. Other groups have been successful. Michael Jackson. And certainly there was an emotional payoff maybe for some people, but not nearly the masses. Elvis had an emotional payoff. He was this sex symbol. He was this guy who was breaking all the rules. And maybe we had an emotional payoff there. But these guys were like us. They were like us. And we could identify with them in a great way. They ushered in a great era of music. And they're like I said, their songs were innocent. They had, if you listen to the lyrics of their songs, they weren't suggestive or provocative at all in the beginning. I mean, their lyrics became a lot more controversial as they go on. But we identified with this group on a great way. But something happened in 1966 that forever changed the path of the Beatles, and you might have heard of this, but there was a magazine called Datebook Magazine. And they were interviewing John, and he had already endured several years of the mass hysteria that surrounded the group. And they asked him about the group. And he asked him about some things. And John Lennon, I don't know if it's fortunate or unfortunate, and maybe it depends on how we look back on things. But he says in the magazine, Christianity will go. It will vanish and shrink. I needn't argue about that. I'm right, and I will be proved right. We're more popular than Jesus now. I don't know which will go first, rock and roll or Christianity. Jesus was all right, but his disciples were thick and ordinary. It's them twisting it that ruins it for me. This comment spawned album burnings in the South, but actually all over the world, but particularly in the southern United States. There were Beatles bands on radio. They didn't want to listen to the Beatles anymore. They thought, you know, who are these guys to think they are greater than Jesus Christ? These guys are really lost. They've really gotten so full of themselves. But then again, you know, you have to think that when these people were just four guys from Liverpool, England, and all of a sudden people are looking to them like they're disciples. And you have to imagine that at a young age of 26, I know when I was 26, I didn't have all the wisdom in the world. So I can only imagine that these guys were trying to figure out why all the hysteria was around them and what was it about the people that were drawn to them that made them this popular. How did this happen? It's like people are looking to us for the answers and we're just a couple of blokes from Liverpool. How did that happen? And I'm sure John did not mean any ill will by saying that they were more popular than Jesus, but his words were certainly taken in a way that created a fervor around them. And from that point forward, the Beatles never toured again. They were scared of their safety. They were scared of what might happen to them. Funny enough, even though they never toured after that, some of their greatest music happened after that. Let It Be, All You Need Is Love, Hey Jude, Here Comes the Sun. I mean, the list goes on and on of great songs that happened after the Beatles had stopped touring. I've thought about the Beatles and how people just were looking to them for something. Maybe Beatlemania was assisted and helped out by the fact that when they came to America, we were only 3 months removed from the John F. Kennedy assassination. A very, very poignant moment in American history where it was a defining moment in our history that forever changed our innocence. And here the Beatles were. They represented a new day, a new generation. We could focus on something else now. We didn't have to think about JFK as much anymore because, oh my gosh, we have all of this great music coming over from England. But nonetheless, these guys were just musicians. And they, too, were on a path and on a journey to try to figure out what their role was to play in all of the hysteria. And I thought back, and I was thinking about how their coming to America related to how Jesus came into this world and into the place of Nazareth and what it meant and how they compared in a lot of ways. For one, they were both came from very obscure beginnings. There was not anything, no one got together in 1962 and said, you know what, we're going to go on a mad search, and the first place I'm going to look is Liverpool, England, for the greatest rock band to ever come. No one was looking to Liverpool for anything. Not to say there's not anything nice in Liverpool. They have a nice ferry ride that you can go there across the Mersey River. But we weren't looking to Liverpool to find the greatest band of all time. These guys just happened to be who they were. And they came from this place, and by virtue of where they came from, Liverpool has become a popular place, a tourist site. And much like Jesus, no one was going to look at Nazareth to find the most influential person of all time in the history of human beings. Writer John Dominic Crossan wrote a book, and he described Jesus as a Mediterranean Jewish peasant. And this wasn't to insult Jesus. This was more to just give a picture of his humble beginnings. No one was writing books about Jesus when he was 5 years old. But we are the followers. We saw something in both of these We saw something in the Beatles. We saw ourselves in the Beatles. The people of Jesus' time saw themselves as this guy who came from them, came from where we were. He understood us. He knew who we were. He was just a carpenter, matter of fact. And he represented a portion of people that needed representation. In Jesus' day, there was the Sadducees, there was the Pharisees, and there were the Romans. And the Sadducees and the Pharisees, they were the hierarchy of the Jewish society. The peasants really weren't accounted for. No one really cared about the well-being and the spiritual well-being of the peasants as long as they did their duty, as long as they paid their tithes and did their offerings and their sacrifices. No one was really concerned about their spiritual well-being. They just had to follow the rules. And what Jesus said when he came to Peter and James in the boat, "Come and I'll make you fishers of men. Let me bring you along with me, and let us show men how empowered they can be." And as people looked at Jesus, they started seeing that here's this person that came from within their community and within themselves to live a life that was beyond where they came from. All of this led me to a really important question. Because just like Beatlemania and the belief in Jesus, it was what we related to. It was what we resonated with within each one of these beliefs. And we are here today in a unity church because of a belief that we have, a belief that we hold in what this spiritual community means to us. What does this experience mean? We are the ones that gives unity power. We are the ones that give Charles and Myrtle their story. We're the ones that relate to Myrtle's healing. We're the ones that relate to Charles's teachings. We are the ones that give this movement its credence. And Charles Fillmore always asked his followers to take what works for you and leave the rest. We're not here to tell you what to believe. We're here to tell you to believe what you believe and be true to that. This is the truth of unity. And it may be that we sit next to one another here in the seats, and we may have very different perceptions on Christianity and on the social infrastructures. We might have in this congregation several Democrats, several Republicans, maybe several Libertarians. We each give that power to that movement or to that thing or to what it is that we need, that we resonate with. What unity encourages is that we must be true to that. There is not a set dogma or a belief that unity has. Yes, we have the 5 basic principles, but we are not telling you to believe in the Trinity. We're not telling you to believe in the resurrection of the Christ. We're not telling you to believe that Jesus walked on the water. We're not telling you to believe that Moses parted the Red Sea. But if those things are those things that you believe, then be true to that. Embrace that. And know that unity is a place that is not going to condemn those beliefs. We give the credence to our beliefs. We are what resonates with these things, whether it be the Beatles, whether it be Jesus, or whether it be the Dalai Lama, whether it be fill in the blank, could be the chancellor of the university here. If you believe in something, be true to it. Reflect on what your emotional payoff is and where you were giving your energy. And let that be your guide. Let that be your own personal Beatlemania.